50% of your positive outlook, your inner world, the way you're wired, comes from your genetics and your behavioral stuff that happened in childhood. 40% is your inner world.
Wow.
10% is circumstantial.
Oh my gosh. And see how much emphasis and time and energy do we spend on the 10%?
That's right.
And try to like we either blame it or try to change it or do things that the amount of energy I spend on that 10%, I don't even want to measure it.
Hello, Mary.
Hello, Gillian.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Do you like a Cinderella story?
Well, it depends.
You know, not the Cinderella, like in Disney.
Okay. Like a makeover from
even just like a Cinderella story. Someone you look at and you go, wow, look at where that person has come from.
Okay.
And what they're doing with their life.
Yeah.
And the odds are against them.
Oh, I love those stories.
Me too.
Yeah.
I eat them up.
Yeah. Because it's hopeful.
It's so hopeful.
Regardless of your circumstances, it feels like there's things that can change for the better.
So I was watching one of these good news stories the other day, and this single mom raising 3 kids, living in a crappy apartment.
Right.
But it was pretty. She had made it so pretty, and it was neat as a button. And all the kids were they all had their list of jobs, setting the table, the whole works. They all had an active part in the life of the home.
Right.
And she was working 2-3 jobs, virtual jobs and, different things while the kids were at school.
Right.
And putting herself through school.
Oh, wow.
And all of them were sitting at the dinner table afterwards doing their homework.
Wow. Including mom.
Including mom.
That's so cool.
And she's like, I want my children to see that success takes some hard work and takes some perseverance, and we're going to make this a better opportunity for my children.
I always find those kinds of things inspiring.
I know.
It feels really hard. I mean, I admire them. And sometimes we do have a tendency to kind of put things up on a pedestal, put people up on a pedestal if they can do things like that. But really what she's done is she's thought about what is really valuable to her.
Exactly.
Which is her family, her kids, absolutely.
Yep.
But also to show perseverance and how you can get ahead and how you can change your circumstances.
That's right.
In spite of hardships.
And the thing is, if you looked at her exterior world,
right,
things would be very much against her.
Right.
She would have every reason to lie on the couch.
Right.
As I was while I was watching this story.
Were you having your onion rings?
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
But yeah, the outside, her world was very much against her.
Right.
Yet she was taking control of what she valued, what she dreamed and hoped for her children, right?
Amazing.
And making it happen.
Amazing. Yeah, we're calling this episode an inside job.
Yep.
Because it really is the inner work. And you're not hearing us say anything that you haven't heard us say before. But I think this chapter, Dr. Cloud does a really good job in reminding us how the inner work, working on ourselves, having the self-awareness and the teachability and growth mindset and all those wonderful things can end up playing out in our life. And so regardless of circumstances, even if I lose a job or a relationship or there's something that happens, I still take me into that next chapter of my life.
That's right. And you know what? This is my favorite chapter.
Yeah.
This is my favorite chapter so far.
Yeah.
And not because I have this one sorted, because it's such a poignant reminder that the inner work that we all need to continue doing.
Right.
That there is payoff.
There are fruit that grow from that.
Oh,
it's so worth it.
Huge.
Yeah, because who you are at the end of the day is the person that goes into any situation, and you're going to be that much braver and kinder and more capable and all of those things, more confident.
And, I think we all have a tendency to go, well, if I only had more money, or if I only lived in a different home, or if I only had that different job or that different spouse.
Right. Right.
I'm only teasing you, that my life would be so much better. But a number of years ago during the pandemic, I took a course that was offered through Coursera that came out of the University of Yale.
Right.
And it was on happiness.
Love it.
And in the study, there's so much research about happiness right now. The last decade, there's been so much invested in busting the myths around what makes people happy. And this is what they said in that course and in the research. 50% of your positive outlook, your inner world, the way you're wired, comes from your genetics and your behavioral stuff that happened in childhood. 50%. So you can't really do a lot around that except see a therapist. 40% is your inner world. 10% is circumstantial.
Oh my gosh. And see how much emphasis and time and energy do we spend on the 10%?
That's right.
And try to like we either blame it or try to change it or do things that the amount of energy I spend on that 10%, I don't even want to measure it.
No, and the unfortunate thing, the myth of the 10% change is that a lot of times it's a quick fix, like a new couch, you know, a new car, a new job. But that 10% boop of happiness, as you call it, the boop, it only lasts for a very short time, and then we flatline again.
Well, because then we have to find the next external thing.
That's right.
Because if it's only 10% of our life, it's probably only affecting us or changing our happiness 10%. Like it's not having the impact that we think it is. And think about it, like when we look at social media and what we're being sold, it's all about the external.
It is. So people, this is a gem for you. Because if only 10% of your happiness quotient is based on circumstances, but 40% is based on your inner world and the work that you can do on yourself, where do you think you should invest?
Well, do the math. I'm looking at my son here, who's our wonderful producer, because he likes to tease me about how often I say, do the math.
Yeah, but it's true. But we do have this tendency to look at the circumstances, right?
Yes.
And that's just not going to get us where we need to go.
And even the biology, although you can't change it because you do have certain temperaments. There is so much you can do if you practice the attitudes and the behaviors and the shifts that you make that develops you, the real you, and the life that you get to live as a result of that.
Well,
That's
and we
so,
do
hopeful.
Well, the thing that you mentioned is the mindset piece. Because we could have grown up in a household that was very negative or critical. We actually have agency over our mindset. It takes work.
It totally takes work.
But as you say, we can rewire those neurons, those neural pathways in our head.
Well, you know, just as a personal example, I did grow up in a fairly typical Asian household. And I've talked about this to Asian parents that I meet along the way, where it's all about work hard, study hard, and not a lot of affirmation. If anything, it's always corrective, critical, pushing. And I'm not saying that there weren't some good things that came out of that in my drive to work hard and all of that. But man, the negatives that came out of that are quite a bit more in terms of my inner critic and how often I doubt myself. Part of my people pleasing comes from that as well. I'm always looking for the critic in the room to gain their approval. And so I kind of had to be really intentional about saying, I am not doing this for my kids. I am not giving them that type of upbringing where they don't feel good about themselves because I'm always picking at things. Now, I can't say I did it perfectly because sometimes things would come out of my mouth before I even realize it because it's so automatic.
Yes, it is.
But the number of times I can stop and correct it, then I can do better. So
we can work on that piece too.
We can work on that piece.
And we can't let that be,
late.
Well, if 50% is our genetics and our DNA and all that, there's nothing we can do about that. We can do a good poke at the bear there.
And there is lots of science around how we can rewire our brain too.
Takes work, but it's worth it.
It takes work, but it's worth it. Exactly.
So this is what Cloud says. Cloud says, our heart, mind, soul, strength, talents, and energy, when we take all that and invest it outwardly, if we've done the work, no matter what happens, the job loss, the life transitions, etc., we can build and bank on what inside us got us to where we are now.
Right.
So despite whatever happens, if we're doing the internal work, we can navigate the stuff.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
so powerful.
And so in other words, we can leverage all the gifts and the strengths and their heart and soul and brain power to take us towards new opportunities, new paths, and new ways to contribute to our outside world.
Right. Right.
So just as you said, you made a conscious choice that you were not going to repeat the patterns from your growing up with your own children.
Right.
That was making those significant inner world changes.
Yeah.
So hopeful.
It is. And it's never too late. I mean, it really is never too late. I mean, we think it is. Oh, my kids are grown up, or the situation is the way it is. And it might not be doing this wholesale change again, but it just be those small baby changes, baby step changes, and it can make a really big difference, for sure. So it needs to be a priority in our life. We need to put, if it's only 10% external, 90% internal, that's what we have to prioritize.
So he says, our life is never on the outside. It's always on the inside.
Yeah.
The invisible life always produces the visible life. Life works inside out. How many of us think it works outside in, though?
Right.
We internalize that outside stuff. And it really affects our relationships, our marriages, our jobs, everything.
The other thing, too, he says, oh, Henry, why do you keep poking at us? He says, we all have issues in life. We all have a lot of issues. We may have dysfunctional relationships, floundering careers, burnout, stress, lost dreams, debt, and more. But the truth is that many of those issues come as a result of whether or not we are tending to and guarding our inside life, our heart, our mind, our soul, and our strength. Wow. Like our heart, he says, our hearts will determine the issues in our life.
Oh, my Lord.
That's kind of...
It sounds like Hallmarky.
Yeah.
Right? It does.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say it actually sounds to me, maybe my mindset, it sounds like it's triggering a little bit of shame, actually, and blame. Like, my issues are my fault. That's what the conclusion is that I'm thinking, which I know is not true.
No.
But that's what comes to mind. So that it's because I didn't tend my heart, and that's why I have issues.
But I think that it kind of goes back to seeing our part in things.
Right.
And like if, for instance, if we have unforgiveness that we haven't dealt with, that sticks with us.
Yeah.
And that will affect.
Right.
So it's not to produce shame or guilt. It's to go, you have some unresolved things that you need to take care of.
Right. I think that's important clarity. So we're not saying that your issues are your fault.
No.
We're saying that we all have issues, but there's aspects of your responsibility and your actions that affect how those issues play out in your life.
That's right.
I think that reframing helps it for me, because for someone who is in the shame center, it's easy for me to go to that self-blame part, so that it's tending my heart in a hopeful way can help address and make better the issues in my life.
Yeah.
And that if there's a lot of dysfunction going on in my life, I got to be honest with myself. I'm playing a part in it.
That's right. So going back to that single mom raising the 3 kids and having kind of all the odds against her, she is dealing with her stuff.
Right.
She is choosing a different path.
Right.
And she's probably doing a fair bit of internal work in order to stay moving forward. Right?
You know, how many of us look at, say, people like Brene Brown, who's so successful at what she's doing and has such a huge impact, and we say things like, she's lucky. Right?
Yeah.
As opposed to just the amount of work that she's done on herself.
That's right.
The self-honesty that we see time and time again in how she writes and how she speaks.
Yeah.
And then the lessons that she's learned to that self-honesty, and then the hard work she puts into being able to help the rest of us. That is a lot.
It's huge.
And she's not lucky. I mean, she has opportunities that she's been able to access, but really it is a lot of her own inner work.
It is. And, I think to myself, like, he says, we are like a tree bearing fruit. If we're, and this goes back to Brene Brown, if we are prioritizing and devoting time to our inner spiritual world, and she would use that term too, and we know that we are increasing the capacities of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. If we really believe that we will do all that we can to make sure the tree is healthy and strong before the fruit shows.
Right.
A healthy tree produces fruit, but it needs tended to. An unhealthy tree withers and becomes a home for insects that feed on decay.
That's an awful image. I don't like bugs.
I know you don't. That's why I threw it in there.
I know. No, I've kind of read on. I wasn't tuning you out, but as soon as you said bugs, I did go into a little bit of a spasm there, and I couldn't listen anymore. The other side of the coin, as you say, with the fruit, is that we get to enjoy the good fruit of our investment. And so do the people in our life.
Exactly.
So when we talk about issues, we're not just talking about dysfunctional issue. We're also talking about the good stuff.
Yeah.
The good stuff in life. So it's not luck in having a good life, because it's intentionality around choices you make and the responsibility you take. So you can have a good life, regardless of that 10% of circumstances that are happening in your life.
And, when we use the Brene Brown, she was doing the work. She didn't know that it would lead necessarily to books and speaking engagements.
That's true.
She was just doing the work.
Right.
And out of that came a desire to share it.
Right.
Right. So that other people could do the work too.
And she keeps doing the work.
Yeah, of course.
Every single book becomes more and more vulnerable. That woman, man.
Man, oh man, she's my idol.
I know. Well, again, let's not put her on a pedestal, because she is exemplifying a human who has frailties, who struggles like we do, who experiences pain like we do, who cusses up a storm when she's upset, because she does that in her books. But she is working it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's not just this look at the positive and forget the negative and harmful things that have happened to us, because we're not minimizing abuse and trauma here.
Yeah.
And it may mean working with a therapist, right, to deal with that piece that comes from your genetics.
Right.
But what we're trying to say is, by being able to create new habits, tending to that inner world, it will help us to navigate the circumstances, which are only a minor part of our happiness. Right?
Yes.
We inflate them.
Yeah, we do. And I would say, if you're our age, in our 50s and 60s, and we're still talking about our childhood as if that's the reason why we are the way we are and our circumstances are the way that we are, that's a problem.
It is a problem.
It means that I have not been doing the work to get healing, to grow from it.
That's right.
And so, yes, this is the challenge I find when people go to therapy, is sometimes they get stuck in the place of my poor me, my childhood, and all the things that happened to me. And I'm not diminishing at all how devastating childhood abuse and trauma can be. I'm just saying that if you're sitting here and you're a mature adult and you're still saying the same narrative, and there hasn't been healing, and there's in fact more fear and bitterness and holding back, then there's something that's not healthy about that picture.
I totally agree with that. And imagine moving forward for the rest of your life with that.
Right.
How is your life going to end up? It's not going to be a healthy one.
Right.
That tree is not going to bear fruit.
No. And that's what, I've said this before, we're in that stage of life, the choice between generativity versus stagnation.
Yeah.
And not doing the work, blaming our circumstances keeps us stuck.
Yeah, it does.
Whereas generativity, when we are working on it, we're bearing more fruit, which then allows it to be a blessing to other people. We can bring others alongside. We can lift them up. We can open doors for people.
Yep.
We can coach them, mentor them. We can do so many things.
Yep.
And then in the end of the day, we're the ones who feel so blessed by those experiences of being generous to others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a good question for our viewers and listeners is, where is your energy going? This energy that is this 40% that you can actually manipulate and use and master for your inner world.
Right.
If it's stuck in the childhood place and you haven't been doing the work, all that energy is going there. You have no energy to work on your inner world.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't want to diminish that people do have struggles with
course.
mental health and all of that, but it is, what are you doing to support yourself as best as possible?
That's right.
Getting professional help, getting support in place.
Yep.
Those are so very, very important. Yeah, so this is a good conversation we've been having. It's such a big topic about doing the inner work, and that's what our podcast is all about, is doing the inner work. I hope you take this episode as a reminder, especially with the data that Gillian gave, that only 10% of our happiness is rooted in our external. And so putting the work on the internal is so very, very worth it. And there is so much fruit that comes out of that hard work.
Yep.
Yeah.
So good. Like, it is so hopeful because you can move forward.
Right. Oh, amen. Bingo, bango, bongo, as Gillian likes to say.
Triple B.
Yeah, Triple B. Thanks for tuning in. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Fully Lived Life podcast. We hope you found it encouraging and helpful. Be sure to follow or subscribe so that you never miss a new episode. And if you enjoyed our show, please help spread the word by sharing with your friends and family and posting on your social media. Thanks for listening, and tune in to our next episode.